Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collarwood for YouTube. I'm here to do a Dark Shadows video. Um, this is a response video. I don't always do these, but I've been meaning to do this, and I've been very, very busy, so I apologize for the delay. a, a Dark Shadows fan had commented on a video I did about, Mark B. Why hasn't Mark B. Perry's series been picked up? And that video and again, it was an opinionated video because that's the one thing I always do here. I will give you my honest opinion. I am not here to pull punches. I am not here to lie to you. I'm here to give you my honest opinion. Um, and they had asked me what I felt about David Chase's comments about because he had talked about the Sopranos 25th anniversary and all that stuff, and they were talking. The fan was sort of, I don't know if they were trying to compare it to Dark Shadows. I don't believe they were. I'm gonna say that right away because here's the thing: I've never seen The Sopranos. Okay. Um, Again, if anyone who ever knows me know this, I'm more of a horror guy. I've watched some mafia movies. Sure, I own some. Actually, I think I only own. When you say mafia, I own The Godfather and I own Goodfellas. That's the two mafia movies I own. Now, if you get into noir, which has crime and detective work and stuff like that, um, there's a lot of movies out there like that. So, um, just saying that varies. That is another whole other subject. So I won't get into that here. Um, I would say this to the question you've asked. You wanted my response to this, to everything you would say. Well, here's my response, bro. My response is Dark Shadows, just like Sopranos, is timeless. Now, I said that in the video that myself, Patrick McCrae, Gordon Amowski, Christine Pierce, Cara Tillies, Alan Gallant, we all did a video with Penny Dreadful, and I said Dark Shadows is timeless. Justin Beam, who I asked Justin Beam, who I respect immensely, what his thoughts were on the potential of Mark B. Perry bringing Dark Shadows, back. And he said, Dark Shadows is the original DS is timeless. He said the same thing I said. I don't think he now I don't think he said that because I said that. I think he said that because that's honestly how he feels. He feels the same way I do to a degree. Um, with Dark Shadows being timeless, it's not just Dark Shadows being timeless. That is a big part of it. Dark Shadows, okay, what differs with Dark Shadows and non-Gothic television shows is a lot. Okay, to sit here and tell you the difference is simplistic. And I'm not going to sit here and compare Dark Shadows of the Sopranos. You could say Dark Shadows is a supernatural was ahead of its time. It was a supernatural uh, show based around the family, the Collins family. Um, but I can't sit here and say the Collins family weren't the mob. Okay, and I'm not saying anybody's saying they were. Um, some of them felt entitled, like Roger. um, but to answer your question, I'll say this: Dark Shadows. The thing with Dark Shadows is I don't I can't sit here and tell you how many other shows have been on that are like The Sopranos because again, I'm not a Sopranos fan. I've never watched it like I just said. But I am a Dark Shadows fan. So they brought Interview with a Vampire to television. They brought what was it, that show about witches, Mayfair Flower Witches, to television, which was all written by Anne Rice. Anne Rice, a Dark Shadows fan. Anne Rice, who got, you know, who got probably some of her material, if not a lot of it, from Dark Shadows. Uh, I'm just giving my opinion. I'm just saying. Um, Dark Shadows has inspired a lot of people. Stephen King, I would dare say, was inspired because he was a Dark Shadows fan. Okay, he talked about Dark Shadows at one point in time. There have been many shows that have similar elements of Dark Shadows, like Supernatural, like Mayflower Witches, Interview with a Vampire. Now, with a Vampire was a novel, then a movie. But you get what I'm saying. These things have been brought to television, and they have the elements of DS, but they're not called what? They're not exactly trying to be what? Dark Shadows. They're they have those elements of DS, but they're not trying to necessarily be Dark Shadows. That's my that's my elephant in the room. My elephant in the room is, look, if you have all these other shows that are on television that have Dark Shadows elements in it, meaning the supernatural, meaning vampires, meaning ghosts, meaning witches. If you have those shows on television, my contrast is, then why the hell don't you give Mark B. Perry a chance to do his sequel series to the original series of Dark Shadows a chance? That this is the best way I can answer your question. Those products that I just mentioned, the Interview with the Vampire television series, Mayflower Witches television series. Now, Supernatural is no longer on air, but it was for a long time. Okay, though, so you have two shows that are on, a show that was on, and there was another vampire show that was on AMC. I don't know if it's still on there. I forget what it was called. Um, it had vampires, it had witches in it. Again, I misplaced it at this point in time. Oh, and by the way, didn't they try to reboot or did reboot True Blood? That's another vampire show. That's another supernatural type of show. So, again, and by the way, the creator of True Blood is a Dark Shadows fan. This is my point. There are so many shows that are either there are shows that are on television that aren't necessarily Dark Shadows, but somewhat have the Dark Shadows tone in a sense that aren't DS. And do they copy DS on purpose or necessarily, you know, mirror image it? No, they don't do that because, again, Dark Shadows centered around a family named the Collins family who owned the biggest fishing fleet, who their family founded the town, etc., etc. You know the story. My thing of it is, why why have shows on television that are either A, similar in Dark Shadows tone, or B, have the same themes as Dark Shadows, but yet they don't have Dark Shadows on television. They don't have Mark B. Perry's Dark Shadows on television. Why? My question is, why? Why not? If you're going to have those other shows on cable networks, why doesn't sit back and see what's on television, those shows specifically, and go, you know what? We should give Mark B. Perry's series a shot, especially if they've read the script. Again, I only know that the granddaughter, I think what the granddaughter or something of Victoria Winters is going to be a character. That's all I know. I want to make that very clear. Um, I just think they should give Mark B. Perry's series a shot. And yes, they should let Mark B. Perry have final say on every episode. And I do mean that. Another thing with Dark Shadows, and again, I've never seen The Sopranos. I have not. I can't sit here and tell you what. I've never. I know. I'm going to go to hell, right? The thing with Dark Shadows is too, and you again. I'm going to give a huge shout out to my buddy John Philip Benford. I did an interview with John many moons ago about his blog, The Return of Dark Shadows, and I was asking him. Me and him were talking about the potential of Mark B. Perry's sequel series when it was initially announced. I think me and him were talking about it, and I asked him. Again, I never know anybody's response. I don't rehearse my interviews. I shoot often straight from the hip. I've only had ever one celebrity on here, which, again, my door, as I've said, is always open to anybody. You want to come on my channel, hit me up on Messenger. With that being said, I asked John, does Mark B. Perry necessarily, I think I had asked him, do they need like every original character? And I loved John's response, and I believe his response was, they don't necessarily need, he doesn't necessarily need those characters like there every day. He needs them for maybe sort of to set up, hey, this is where these other characters are cemented from, like Carolyn, this is Carolyn's kids, this is David's kids, that stuff. That they need them for to a degree. But the one thing Dark Shadows has always had, as long as they've had the Ghost, one of the most important unsung things that Dark Shadows has had is portraits of their family members. And those that the Cullens could always point out those portraits and who they were descended from and who they were related to. They did that in episodes. I just covered recently an episode where they pointed out Roger's great uncle or something, Uncle Benjamin Collins. Again, that's something they did do in Dark Shadows. They pointed out the portraits, Isaac, Jeremiah, et cetera, et cetera. All those historical portraits. You have a portrait of Barnabas, so make a portrait of the late Joan Bennett as Elizabeth. Make a portrait of Carolyn Collins' daughter. Make a portrait of David Collins, because those portraits being talked about and who you're descended from is just as important as those characters being there. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. Because, look, we did not meet the ghost of Jeremiah for a long while. For a very long while. What's the only two things we had to go on with Jeremiah? His portrait and what they said about him. Those two things went hand in hand with DS. And they always have. They always have. We hear about Josette, right? What's the next thing we see before we see the ghost? The portrait. The portrait of Josette in the old house. So I hope I answered your question. I don't know if I did or not, honestly, but that's the best response I have to your question. I hope it answers it. If it doesn't, I apologize. But yeah, I'm going to leave some links. Links to Be Night and Beguile is going to be in the description box. And yes, link to The Return of Dark Shadows, both written by John Philip Betancourt, are going to be in the description box. Huge shout out to him. Guys, gals, you have a wonderful day. I'll see you later.